Inside out and backwards. Indeed.
This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. Hello, and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started.
Namaste. What's up? For the record, in case anybody was left with lingering doubts, I meant zero disrespect to the Constitution yesterday, or whatever day it was when I said believe in it. Is it a religious document? I was just questioning the nature and the use of that terminology and why it is we call certain secular things sacred. As in, like, what do we mean by that? Like, why is government things sacred? A little weird to me if you really think about it. I can also totally get the comfy sort of course, there's this, the wink, wink, nudge, nudge sort of insider vibe of like, of course there's a separation of church and state, but also only we, the special chosen ones, know what's up. But whatevs. That's a whole nother episode. Good morning and or good afternoon to you. I don't know if you're listening to this live, if you're listening to this in some other time zone here on this planetoid commonly known as Planet Rock, or if you're tuning in somehow trans-dimensionally. But namaste, fools! And what a day to be alive, right? Historical, big league historicalness. Like, of the most epically huge proportions. To say it all Trumptopian like. Where to begin? Well, in the beginning, I suppose, but therein lies the catch. Like, where is the beginning? That question opens so many different and annoyingly complex can of worms type ego situations that I think most people just chuck it and don't even bother, right? And so we get through this process, if I may be so bold as to propose to you, dear listener, that as we work / argue / debate / fight / actually fight, we need like political faux fighting for the abstract allegorical use of the term and phrasing about fighting towards political aims without using violence, right? From the actual use of violence towards political aim. And if we may, could we just all take a big, deep breath? I wish I had a fun, magical, special effect for like, join me in Zen breathing. I don't know what the special effect would sound like, but it would be neat to have like a very Zen. Insert your own interpretation of what that means here. I just like plunk it every time I'm like, hey, let's take a moment to breathe here and consider. What were we considering? Where was I going with this? No matter where you go, no matter where you turn, no matter how you slice it, society as we encounter it, as we have grown into it, right? Because none of us asked for this. Even the weirdos who have elevated and escalated themselves into power, they are not the architects of this multi-layered, batshit crazy, complex worldwide system of which we all sort of are impossibly inculcated and like impossible to extricate ourselves from. We're so immersed in it because literally, and this is one, I come back to this a lot because I want you to analyze it in various contexts. So right off the bat, the top of the show, I'm just going to hit you with this concept, right? I don't know what state of mind you may or may not have been in when you turned on today's show, but welcome to the madness. We might very well often find ourselves being tempted to blame society, and vis-a-vis that, blame others as a sort of generic subcategory of society at all, but basically not me, not mine, not us and ours, but them people over there, whoever they are. And I'm not calling any one person or group or process out, and I'm not trying to accuse anybody of anything that's not going on in their life. I'm saying in the broadest sense, if we really stop and look and analyze at our societal movements, it becomes impossible to unsee once you've seen it, that like everywhere, society seems to be, to some degree, not in any absolutist, totalitarian, every inch of it, every person involved with it kind of way, because that kind of nonsensical thinking is not applicable in reality. It's only good for manipulating people, and I'm not trying to manipulate anybody. I'm just trying to point out that there's manipulation laid out in front of everyone, in every variety and flavor desirable. No one is free of manipulation. And those, and I know that this sort of implicates myself, but those running around accusing others of being manipulated, can you just sort of visualize a hallway of mirrors and tunnels and echo chambers all lining up? For I am saying, hey, whoa, everybody. What's the new one? I just saw one. It's not new, but I just had never seen anybody put it on a meme. Not slow your roll. I do like me some slow your roll. I gotta slow my own roll, for I spiral out of control. And as we rock and roll, let me turn it over to my imaginary co-host, I'm trying to find a really fun, reliable, industry kind of intro for him, but I'm failing and I'm sucking. The intractable, something that would be similar to the incorrigible. Intractable, it kind of works for him, but also there would be a Zeppo. You're, no offense, DJ Zed, but I don't think you're another Zeppo from another timeline. You're your own Zed. Therefore would have your own other Zeds from your own other timelines, right? Okay. Timelines within timelines within timelines! An infinite fractal arrangement of you dancing. Get up and dance. If you cannot or will not actually get up and dance, at least wiggle a little and pretend to get up and dance in your mind. The tragedy of our postmodern era could be stated as such. We are experiencing an overabundance of dilemmas. How does one cope with dilemma after dilemma after dilemma after dilemma after dilemma after dilemma after, like, you're trying to catch your breath, right? And as some people very justifiably, I'm not disagreeing with the fact that this is a justified feeling. I can't heal if they keep stabbing me in the throat, right? Like, yeah, you're right. Like, you're gonna die. You got to do something a little bit more hardcore than meditative healing right that hot second. But when all of that is an existential cacophony of existential dilemmas, not an actual blade to the jugular, when you can sit through it day to day, minding your own business, watching your favorite TV shows, listening to your favorite podcasts, mine, right? Like, I'm your new favorite podcast. No matter what it is, it's stuck, you bug, you're addicted now. You want to know what I said in the past and what I'm going to say in the future. And what I said in the other dimensions that I haven't said yet that you're going to hear later when I layer it in. Because I come back from the other dimensions and say it. What? This cacophonic? This cacophony and I forgot what that word is called. When you change a word, when you run through the like gear shifts, gear changes of all the ways, conjugation. The conjugation of cacophony into its descriptor, like, it was such a cacophonic experience. However you would pronounce that. This echo chamber of infinite dilemmas. What do we do? And of course, you know, this is a spiritually inspired show. And one of the obvious sort of cliche, of course you'd say that kind of answers is like, well, we've got to find balance, man. And that's so true, it hurts. Like, it's a bleeding, gaping wound of pain. It's so true. And it's so simply, easily dismissed as a stereotype. that we don't attend to it. We don't attend to the wound. We don't attend to the need. We don't attend to the calling that's there. But we need to balance, and we also need to address, because for every action there is an equal and opposite, reaction. We need to counterbalance, right? When you're on a surfboard, although for some people that, like, I've never tried to surf. I've boogie boarded, so I can kind of, and you know, if you didn't know, that's a real thing. There's a surfboard and there's a boogie board. And there's a skim board, which may or may not have an M in it. I don't remember, which is a whole nother effing thing. But if you've never been on any of those kinds of water, what are you doing when you're doing that? There's a word for it in your language. Water riding devices. What? If you've ever walked or stood on a tricky balance position object thing and understood that there are multiple angular forces at work, that gravity isn't just pulling you down. I think another really great example, if you've ever taken that intro to tightrope walking class, tightrope walking. Why don't you people pronounce your words the way you spell them? Because walk would really be walk. I'm gonna go for a walk, y'all. Not a war. Whatever you call walking. It's such a subtle suggestion to the L. Like the tongue is still trying to make the L sound. If you pronounce walking correctly, Johnny Walker Purple. Well, that was weird. Sorry, you guys. If you ever stood on a rope, if you ever tied a rope to two things, make sure you don't do this. Don't ever try this at home. Of anything I talk about. Think about it in vivid detail, like you're really lucidly daydreaming, and ask it to follow the rules of organic physics, the way it really exists, not the way some people believe in them. Let your imagination be the laboratory of your organic, scientific, phenomenological understanding of reality, man. If I may be so bold to make that kind of suggestion. Whoa. What? The imagination. It can, could, should, would be not just a delightful tool akin to a virtual toy for the delights of visualizing things that don't exist. It can, could, should, would be considered a think tank experiment with, that you can. It's a computer. It's a computer prototyper. It's where innovation happens. It's the place where we can map literally something that is already real while also modeling something that exists only in potential or potentia and has yet to be made manifest real, right? It's that nexus. The imagination, I could do a whole effing special series on what the imagination is. And what a deep, sad, not so ironic tragedy that for most people, we sort of really traumatically abandon our imaginations very early and during a formative period of our developmental stage, because we get mocked and ridiculed for using it in some weird, peculiar, whatever, personal, tangent way, some sort of self-expressive, that people may are uncomfortable. And more likely, double whammied by the fact that the system is not built to encourage the deep development of one's imagination, except for in a weird, narrow, limited way. What the fuck was I talking about? This blurb that I wrote for the show, the opening of the show. Let me just hit that up and walk through it. Abundance of dilemmas, too many things, right? Like Trump and everything Trump did. Because that was, to be quite honest, and I get why his fans have remained so excited about him. I do not understand why anyone looks at that person and goes, yep, that's the person I'm not only going to support politically, which is something I generally sort of don't do. Like, I assess and report back my opinion on and throw my wonky, sometimes very weird criticism at the whole entire spectrum of political activity and political perpetrators. Ooh, that's a harsh word to put in that place of that sentence / building of that paragraph. Political participants, political actors, their own terminology, which is fun and ironic that they use it because, the conspiracy theorists are all like, they're all just actors. They're all just paid puppets. There's corruption, yes, but is anything absolutely anything absolutely? Of course not. That's too many uses of absolute in a sentence for it to make any sense in reality. But there is a shit ton of dilemmas going on in reality, and Trump is like a whole dumpster fire of his own craziness of dilemmas. And so there's that, right? And then all the other pre-existing dilemmas that we cannot... It would be a huge mistake. We would be remiss in the highest order of folly to neglect, ignore, throw out the window, throw out like a baby stuck in the bathwater in the 17th century. I don't know if that century reference is correct, technically speaking, but you know what I mean with the bathwaters and the bathtubs that you tip over into a giant spout. That's why they had gargoyles all over the fronts of buildings, because they were spouts where all the poo water came out. And you didn't want to stand right in front of a building where there was a bunch of gargoyles because they would literally like vomit, puke out bathwater and shit on you for funs and giggles. I forget what era that was in, but that was a real thing. Look it up if you think that that's crazy. Hey man, Europeans, crazy history. It's not my fault. And I have no hate. But let me put a pause and pin in it. We have so many dilemmas in the good old United States of Trumptopia that a show of hands survey would be like shockingly like, oh wow, they've never heard of this kinds of results about what's going on in Europe with some of like the advanced level social disruption going on. And never mind Myanmar. Everybody else in the world that's a Buddhist or likes Buddha, even as a bumper sticker, is looking at you, Myanmar, like, WTF? And yay, protesters supporting democracy, but also, where's all, like, the doubling down on meditation and yoga to heal the nation? And where's all the spiritual work? Are we seeing that? Is this just not getting reported on at all by anybody? Because, Myanmar, Buddha with his angry face on is looking at you saying you're doing it wrong. Just like Jesus is looking at everybody who calls themselves a Christian saying, most of you all are doing it wrong. Especially if you're doing a lot of judging and hating and wanting to destroying of other people. All your favorite deities are like, ooh, angry face, you're doing it all wrong. But who am I to say? I'm just some crazy robot from another dimension sent here to warn you that according to the divinities that persist throughout all the multiplexes of dimensions everywhere, dimensionality is an aspect of divinity. There's no arguing that like, oh, different places have different gods. No, y'all are idiots, and wherever you are in different places, you call the same divinity different names and then kill each other over it. Y'all have to stop that, first of all. Second of all. Third of all. Because you're doing it on so many levels, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous. No offense. Hate to sound all judgy and better thou than But it's a little bit annoying. It's a little bit kinder care. Like, come on, kids, stop stabbing each other in the eyeball over who gets to play with the cowboy horse. Like, what? To make up an imaginary. Where was I going with any of this? I'm just in the mood. How's everyone doing? Is everyone recovering from Valentine's Day? Ugh, right? Who's got a good gnarly hangover? Admit it. Not me. I'm doing a year without drinking, and I cheated a lot already. So I'm starting it with the Lunar New Year. Sorry, China. I almost said Chinese New Year, and I guess that's no longer cool anymore. But yeah, Confucius and all the versions of Chinese Buddha are looking at you, China, going, "You're doing it all wrong too, China." Everybody's prophets is looking at everybody, going, I think you guys have gotten it all backwards and inside out. And we come back to the original point of the blurb. There's so many things, right? There's actual existential dilemmas. Like, what are we going to do about how toxic? Never mind the argument about whether or not climate change is real or not. Everything that we do, every machine we use, every device, every tool, every mechanism of economic activity in any way, shape, or form is toxic. Even all the supposedly green tech that we have right now, and I used very cartoony, dripping with sarcasm, bunny ears face emoji right there. Like, we're leagues away. And so never mind whatever you think or don't think, never mind the argument about whether or not climate change is real or not real. Toxic shit is bad for you. If you sat in an airtight room with 4 old school, really sexy, like whatever your favorite muscle car from the 70s is, whatever, just running all day long, you'd be dead. I don't even know how long it would take. Like less than a week. You'd be dead in a matter of hours, right? If you had 3 of those things just running. And it could be a nice, big, fat, luxurious garage full of, but if you imagine a big, your sexiest, crazy Jay Leno, I've got so much money I can afford 11 cars. Now, but stand there in that room, airtight, no air conditioning, no airflow, with all the engines running. What's going to happen to you? You will be dead in a matter of hours. And I don't mean to be weird or rude or alarmist, and I'm not criticizing anybody who aspires to having multiple cars. Although, like, why? It's kind of ridiculous. If you're going to have multiples of anything, why not have multiple houses that you help people who can't afford housing get into, right? And then, like, help them straighten their fucking lives out. Because what better hobby is there than to, like, help others get their shit together? I don't know. But my point is, everything we do, no matter what we're doing, when you take a sip of that delicious morning coffee or whatever your favorite breakfasty beverage is, and if you don't drink a beverage first thing in the morning, fine. That's a bold choice. Good for you. I do think that, like, people should beverage breakfast and then solids breakfast, because breakfast actually means a thing, right? And it's not just the name of the first meal of the day. But I'm cuckoo crazy robot from the future. So there's that, the simple reality that everything is crazy toxic. Like, even just you and me having this experience as a show, it's not your fault. It's not my fault. Not entirely. We didn't build it. We didn't ask for it all to be made in a toxic fashion. Most of us were just born into this world and were, raised in it and taught whatever we were taught about it. And we developed whatever opinions we had about it. And then we were sort of pushed into the meat grinder of, like, get a job or die. Get a job or fail and die on the side of the road. Because that's what happens. That's what this reality is. It's a very toxic scheme for employing supposedly as many people as possible. I don't know why we didn't ever set out to just guarantee 100% employment except for those physically incapable or mentally incapable of. And then we just sort of like give them a free padded room and some food and take care of them, make sure they're healthy, get a little exercise, and try to cure them of whatever the fuck their shit is. But I'm into the egalitarian modality. And even that I'm like, but we need to strip that out of becoming a toxic ideological construct, right? Because as soon as you turn it into an ideology and you sort of, and we use guns to make you do it, it's all horrible. But I mean literally in a mechanical sense, like in a chemical sense, because everything is still mostly fossil fuel energy based. And I know that there's a whole bunch of people out there that have like piles of coal or sludge, literal like ear sludge of oil jammed in their ears, and they're like, nope, it's a lie. There's an infinite supply of coal and oil, and it's not hurting the planet or life at all in any way, shape, or form. Y'all, the kooky crazy ones, to believe that. Sit in a room, drink only your favorite, any oil product from the raw sewage sludge that is it being pulled out of the earth to any of its delightfully refined products for doing whatever many different magical things that they do that are so effing important to the way in which we run the world. And I say that with some sarcasm and a great depth of acknowledgement that we literally have built a whole world on this range of products with this underlying childish assumption that we'll never need to change it. And we're running up against the cliff. And there's a wall right at the edge of the cliff, so we literally have to climb up the wall to throw ourselves off the cliff, thinking that we've achieved something. We need to radically... And for those of you who are really new to the show, this might be the most radical aspect about like the thesis that I'm weaving for you. But woven into the very fabric of everything is this central notion. For the betterment of humanity, in a reasonable, anchored in love, compassion, forgiveness, and all the inspiring and beautiful teachings of all the different quote unquote prophets, weeding out the crazy cuckoo. Oh, those are obviously just nut jobs that just got a lot of followers to buy into some toxic shit. We weed those out, and then we focus on the ones that seem to be like actual expressions of the human avatar transmuting itself into divine light, and retaining some sense of avatarness, and becoming this being of conscious light matter. And we focus in on whatever they actually taught us, not what their churches bullshit us about what they taught us. And that offends a lot of people. No offense. I know that a lot of people have a lot of investment in the teachings of this or that church. But we really need to radically turn to the original words as they were hopefully not completely lost in their oldest possible known oral tradition. How do we find that, right? Well, by vectoring off of the oldest known written tradition and asking around for oral tradition to see if anything gets us into some deep insight. And then investigating the language used, right? And the words used. And then cross-referencing that across all of the traditions. Because the dogma of the present day formation of organized religion is reliably corrupt enough, right? No offense. And I'm not out to and I'm sure I infuriate people of faith. But I speak from a place of having been a person of faith, so let that be understood before you get all high and mighty and upset at me. I tried to believe and I tried to dig in. And when I couldn't with the one version I was originally sort of introduced to, I tried with everybody else's group. And this is my final, like, lifetime's worth of mulling it over. It's like, aha. We've got it all upside down and backwards, right? We're not supposed to be clinging to dogmatic ideology and giving our blind faith to charismatic individuals that somehow or another have, the special permission or anointment or backing of that personified deity or the other. We're supposed to be exercising the living practices that we're taught. The different variations of things like yoga and meditation and astral projection, etc., etc., etc. We need to completely reevaluate the bulk of everything with the intention to sort of reverse engineer to as far back as possible and to see, like, what was it that Jesus, Buddha, and everybody else that may have been a living divine intervention into the human organism, or a living manifestation of divine transmutation of the human individual, right? And see what they were doing. Not what they were asking anybody, demanding anybody believe in, because that's how you get to Donald Trump. Weaving it all together. That's how you get to statist, religious co-opting of insert whatever country here into a weird, that country's version of, like, and now we have family dynasty government in some oppressive form or another. And that's the opposite of freedom, right? And it's funny how the people who are foaming at the mouth to defend and rally for Trump scream about freedom and don't see how they're shoving this country into a long-standing dynasty family political tradition. And those who can are often caught up, to come back to our structure for the show. We get caught up in, like, there's so many problems. How do we solve this toxicity of democracy devolving into some form of tyranny everywhere around us? How do we solve the fact that our corporate oligarchies are so bottom line driven and so, like, blind to the what's the word I'm looking for? The havoc that they wreak ecologically, which will ultimately render an economic disaster, right? Like, we're facing wave after wave of ecologic and economic disaster of staggering proportions. And it's a pattern that's been building our entire lifetimes. Take your average human lifetime and go, oh, someone who's in the middle of their lifetime right now, and then go back, double that. That's the real dilemma. Where do we begin? Where do we begin? If we can't even effing... Oh, wait, this is rated mature. If we can't even fucking hold Donald Trump accountable by impeaching him so that the party is forced as a party to go through a more honest... Because let's rewind a bit. What happened way back in ye olde ancient days when they lost really hard to the first African-American president of the United States? Like, let's presume that the conspiracy theorists are generally wrong. And although there are some horrible dark truths lurking down those rabbit holes, ultimately we're talking about corruption and normal people. We're not talking about robots or lizards or clones or body doubles or aliens or none of that nonsense crazy stuff. And I hate to offend anybody who's wrapped up in that belief, but I'm trying to draw everyone's attention towards the most healthy, least toxic, most rooted in organic reality as I understand it, because that organic reality is magical as fuck enough. Why invoke more crazy shit? Alarm bells right there. Like, if you're new to the show, buckle in, but know that this, what I just said is at the center of everything, right? So I'm not blindly dismissing conspiracy theory, of which I get accused all the time. Conspiracy theory rejected me, yo. Like, that community broke up with me over and over and over again while I was trying to be a dutiful participant in the questioning of everything. I thought the community and the movement, as it may be, fractured and chaotic and not really unified around anything in particular, doesn't seem to be at any rate. If it is, I apologize. I thought it was anchored, rooted in the notion of actually questioning everything. That seems to be some sort of self-aggrandizing, gaslighting, self-indoctrinating lip service that gets programmed in that no one actually really does, because the first thing people do and this is true, this has been true throughout my entire life. And I'm not trying to troll anybody. I'm trying to share my insights based on my experiences here, right? Being a bit of a whimsical rapscallion of a lovable ragamuffin kind of a weirdo guy. I'm an eccentric, but I'm not an evil, nefarious, to be hated person. I'm on the good side of things. And from everything that I've observed, I think I can say the following with some confidence. Anytime I've in earnest, like honestly, tried to, in a friendly way, engage someone who has revealed themselves to be, through conversation, through self-disclosure, without me bringing it up, or trying too hard to have them do it. Like, so I believe in such as a conspiracy theory. And I bring to their attention to when was the last time you questioned your content? Like, you believe in questioning everything, right? I'm like, have you questioned where you got this content from? Have you questioned why your content is what this content is? The knee-jerk response, and I want to say 99.999% of the time, that would be rude. The realist number would be 97% of the time, because a very small handful of people throughout my sort of vague recollection of doing this for the last, 30 some odd years, conversationally, and this is a passive hobby. I don't chase this down, but this comes up. This totally comes up. And the knee-jerk response, whether face-to-face or online, is fuck you, you're so full of shit. And if in person, it's very jovial, and it's very we could both be wrong, but... And it's not full-on dismissive. If it's online, it gets very readily dismissive of, I'm not even going to entertain, you're so full of shit. Simply from asking, when was the last time you thoroughly questioned your content and its sourcing? Now, that should be the biggest red flag. If you're right now listening or a little triggered by me running through that, you should be asking yourself, the fuck is wrong with me? Why does that trigger me? Because you should always question your content and its sourcing. If you're going to wield the very powerful tool of belief, which is something I prefer to keep like locked up like a relic that should only be broken open in the most serious of matters. Not urgent necessarily, but serious, right? I try not to run around believing in a bunch of nonsense, that's for sure, because then you just bring credibility and believability and gravitas, and ultimately, if this culminates big enough, tangible power in the world. If you fling your belief at stuff. That's my beef with organized religion. Organized religion hijacked what was a living practice that did not require belief, but rather generated healing phenomenological experiences that could not be denied, and replaced it with a construct of belief systems that basically are designed to distract you from these practices that were once being taught and the very urgent and significant and important spiritual healing behind the need for that, quote, living practice. That's at the center of everything. If you're going to enjoy this show, well, and if you've heard it before, forgive me for running through it again. Now, let's take a breather. We'll hand it over to DJ Zed to play for us a little dubstep on the remix live that he wants to call Consequential Timing from his fictional forthcoming album, Nova. Here's the thing. The universe itself long predates any ideological construct. Make sense? Right? Like, for human beings on any timeline, in any time frame, on any planetoid, with any body avatar form, let's call everything that's alive that becomes person beings. We need new language, right? Our language is limited. Put a pin in that. We talk about that in the show a lot. So seek out all that discussion. It's a bigger issue than just, oh, this word or that word. We've become a little bit careless with the way in which we allow language to develop or regress in its evolution. And language is really sort of more important than we give it credit. Imagine, if you will, for a hot second, I had so many thoughts during that musical break, trying to keep tabs on them, make sure I don't forget it. Imagine, if you will, and I don't want to pick on yoga or anybody who's into yoga, etc., but I want to make an example, right? As if Myanmar wasn't a perfect enough example. Let's imagine a fictional one. Everyone's familiar with yoga, at least with the iconography of yoga, the advertising of yoga. You've seen a commercial for yoga because there's yoga classes near you. Huzzah! Now, the most profound wisdom that can be found in all the teachings of yoga is that yoga is just a tool to prepare you to do the real work. It is itself not the healing or the magic solution or the whatever. But it is a really brilliantly organic, copacetic, super helpful, facilitating practice. But imagine, if you will, in a sort of fictional timeline, that in some country, somewhere in the vicinity of different places where yoga got a really early start and got really popular really early on, imagine that they built a church of yoga, and that they throughout the history, no one really noticed until suddenly it became an oppressive, totalitarian church of yoga where no one does yoga. And you'd have to scratch your head and go, what the fuck? And if we were to take an imaginary visual tour of what that would look like, everywhere in this nation, this organized religion of yoga would have iconography of some prophet of yoga doing yoga positions, but also teaching that you don't need to do it. You just need to think about doing it, or some silly nonsense like that. And then there would be, however many generations worth of dogmatic straying away from actually doing yoga into this abstraction of just meditating about yoga and or something like that, praying about yoga as symbols in the mind, which is great. But then you have to consider that, what it would take for that to evolve into a power structure that becomes corrupt enough to fall for that's all typical, right? With the power to be the most powerful, all of our tribalistic instincts kick in, and then boom, you've got power structures and tribalistic power conflicts and struggles. So we have this tangible cornucopia of dilemmas centered around corruption, and that gets a lot of other stuff projected onto it. I think we need to strip some of that away if we really want to address that, if I may be so bold as to make suggestions along this line. But good and evil, great. It's great that you have an understanding of that. Of course, we need moral boundaries, and we need to address and find the solutions to moral dilemmas and moral quandaries and moral mysteries. But do we need to institutionalize the dogmatic and slightly irrational ideological belief in a spiritual war between good and evil? Or is that ultimately a load of horse shit that when compiled with a bunch of other stuff becomes toxic bullshit nonsense? Dare I say, perhaps yes. Because whatever is going on, here's the big effing secret, right? The big fucking to-do of all the literature I've ever come across is that God is you. So if God is you, then so is the bad guy. If the good guy, if the superhero is God, then the supervillain, whatever name you want to use, and I'm not even bothering naming it, because for a lot of people that's ooh, bad mojo. And there's some validity to that, one can say, because these are indeed For those curious as to where I come from, or not where I come from. I come from wherever the fuck everything comes from. But where I'm standing in terms of cosmological worldviews, there's as much aliveness going on in the ethereal realms where consciousness pools and vectors in ways that we may or may not really understand. But so there's some validity and some significance, right, to this idea of a personified, conscious, supreme being of good and supreme being of not good. But I have a problem, given everything that I understand and everything I have experienced. I have objections to the vilification or the evilification, right? The making evil of the darkness. The making evil of, insert your favorite supervillain from religious texts here. And we could spend forever talking about that. Put a pin in it, because to a certain degree I talk about it a lot. Whenever I address like why we are fighting, what is with us and versus them, like the us versus them paradigm, the dilemma of us versus them programming and its prevalence is deeper than it seems, because it's easy to flatten it out and say, oh, there's some bad guy over there that is doing us wrong, indoctrinating us with this us versus them bullshit. And if we just go kill that bad guy over there, we will win, and that won't happen anymore. My friends, it doesn't work like that. It all goes deeper than deep. And deeper than that. And that's, of course, sort of, the fun, interesting mystery that we poke and prod at throughout the show. So put a pin in that there. But to come full circle, the solution to this ultimate dilemma, because, and I learned this from actually being a lazy fuck. As a young person, we all go through a phase where our body is exhausted. Why? Why do we suddenly feel effing exhausted during puberty? Because our body just radically transformed and expended a lot of energy, utilized and transmuted, literally transmuted a lot of material goods, right? Like capital material and energetic investments were consumed and transmuted in order to completely radically alter the body from whatever modality it was that you call pre-adolescence and the sort of like just sort of slow, everyday, normal growth going on there, to this hugely intense radical change that happens physically. And we, like the idiot talking monkeys with laser beams and nuclear bombs that we have yet to resolve an effective societal system for facilitating everyone going through that process. Because even in the best of conditions in our world as we've come to know it, as we were raised, as we were born into it, it's kind of mildly jarring, to say the least. And under some of the more common conditions, it's actually sort of traumatic to go through puberty uninformed. So never mind that. That's something I haven't talked about much, which we could spend a whole special series going on. But it's a weird, tricky, delicate, sensitive subject that many people get radically triggered about in all kinds of crazy directions, precisely because, not to get too circular in my reasoning here, because we haven't had a sensitive, healing-based, love, and based approach to facilitating everyone who goes through that process. You think we would. Well, with every human avatar going through that really jarring, mildly traumatic to like totally scarring, fucking fuck up in the head traumatic experience. And we've been doing it how many generations? And the knowledge that we are one in the same and yet illusorily separated and experiencing it all as if we were uniquely individual, which is the magical delight, right, of personhood. In your personhood, you feel in a very vivid, seemingly tangible way, extremely alone and isolated. And here we come to the full circle of today's show. It is the almost daily ZenCast, after all. If you were to have scanned or just read the digest notes, like, crib sheets, cheat books about Zen literature, I think you could follow me on this logic. And if you've done deep reading on this, I think you can come to terms, and not necessarily demanding everyone's agreement, but I think you can say I'm not too crazy in saying that the only place to begin. Now, we can get lost in the argument of where is the beginning. I was going to talk about that, but one can get lost in that discussion just to enjoy getting lost in it, right? But like, where does the tree come from? Well, it has parent trees, and they made little fruit, and the fruit had seeds. So if we analyze that, we get this cycle. The seed grows into a tree, which branches out, produces flowers, has this weird, sexy dance of pollinating, which creates fruit, which contain the seeds, which magically contained are more trees with branches and leaves and petals and fruit and flowers and fruit. And if you were to go backwards and ask, where does it all come from? Where is the beginning? You have this seemingly infinite progression of seed embedded in fruit, embedded in flower that stems from branch, which stems from trunk of tree, which stems from the seed, which was embedded in the fruit, which is embedded in the flower, which is embedded in the branch, which is embedded in the trunk, which is embedded in the tree. And the vessel of it, you get this image, right? If you can get awe-inspired and sort of get numbed out right there and tap out and be like, I don't need to think about that anymore. It's too beautiful and weird and transplendent, but what else? But you can eventually sort of get used to that and go, therein lies this infinitude of form being explored. And if you add to that the understanding that the soul is not a product of the body having come into existence, but rather everything's the other way around. Consciousness brings about the soul, which is sort of an energy bridge between various other necessary energy bodies, which all sort of condense into matter, which continuously changes, because what does our body do? Why do we need to eat and poop? Because of all the things that we were just, I was talking about puberty and how we don't handle it well, but what does our body do? And why is puberty what it is? Because it's a massive transformational gear shift in the business that is the general process of evolutionary growth, right? The fractal is unfolding to sort of express this vessel transforming from that which was born into its peak of growth and through its decline and denouement, and return to the state of, I have expressed myself and produced progeny, which will carry forward the instructions and the manifold expression of the material vessel and its variations. And that the whole process is collaborative, it's co-evolutionary, right? The body is changing, and so is the soul, and one can't really extricate one from the other. You can't. Can you separate up from down? Put a pin in that. I've talked about it in depth. If you want to trip on that question for a hot minute, I've shared my thoughts about it. It's a little pin because it's not, you get into like a tight little loop of like, okay, what else can you think about with that? So the beginning, if we straight line everything, if we flatten our understanding of everything out, we create false paradoxes and false dichotomies and false dead ends and false beginnings and false conclusions. Because we're limiting that which is expressing itself in a much more complex fashion. Now, to gain some insights, it is sometimes useful to flatten things out in the short term for the purposes of investigating, specificities. But when we tunnel out, when we really zoom out big, and we recognize that time is not a straight line, our life cycle is not a straight line, and that indeed everything in the universe that can be verified energetically, materially, in the longest, in the fullest form of the broadest view, is a sort of fractal recursive process. That's the tidiest way of expressing it all. It's a living holographic recursion. All of it is alive, even the stuff that we, in our smug, hubris-based elitism, determined to be inanimate. All of it is, in some fashion, alive, because the very fundamental building blocks and fabric of the canvas of reality is emanating from consciousness, from aliveness, not the other way around. Once we sort of begin to wrap our brains around that, therein lies the wisdom as expressed. Was it Rufi or Rumi or one of the other cool Middle Eastern poets that said something to the effect of like, yesterday I was upset, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, therefore I shall change myself. And that's a radically inaccurate paraphrasing. I'm sure I ruined it, and I should have remembered that name correctly. But there, you will have some delight and fun in correcting me by looking it up for yourself. Go read. And if I may be so bold as to encourage anybody who hasn't, go give yourself a delightful tour of all of the world's philosophies of religion. They have a much more je ne sais quoi, quixotic, philosophical remembrance of the practice approach, if I may, right? And some may disagree with that assessment, but I think that if you look at, let's say, the entire world that is Christianity, which is the one I know the best, and I still must recognize that I can't pretend to know each variety and flavor of Christianity super intimately well. But I've got the fundamentals down, and I've got my opinions established, and I've got my understanding into that which comes before any of the variants, right? I've got my insight and my understanding into what could be explored further, which is that which Magdalena and Yeshua actually taught, which if I were to summarize all that into the simplest of terms, it would have been a living practice that was about deepening our practical, pragmatic engagement with and understanding of the living, holographic, fractal consciousness meta-being that is recursive in nature. Because we are a mini whole unit fractal recursion of the whole. We are the children of God. We are the fractal children of God. Conversely, because fractals are what they are and they work the way they work, God is our own fractal. Inceptioned ourselves with God and our ideas of God, right? Because God is the living universe itself, being what it is. And it has no ideologies about itself. We did that. And that's our paradox. That's our toxicity paradox. That's our problem. That is the stick up our ass, collectively, across all species of people who achieve personhood, is that we cling too hard to our ideological constructs and we neglect our direct phenomenological being with that which is reality, which is that which we call divinity or God, which is also us. Like, we cannot separate ourselves from the rest of the cosmos any more than up can be separated from down, any more than a leaf can be separated from the tree and still be alive. And that's why we're toxic as fuck. So where do we begin? Indeed, if we have it all backwards and inside out and topsy-turvy that way, then the only place to begin is to really deeply contemplate the doorway, which Carl Jung points out, right? To look out there, and to paraphrase again very poorly, go find his actual words and let them get into you. But you know, I think I'm honoring his intention. Those who, and I'm trying to express my own postmodern expression of it, which is allowed, because it's not about finding one perfect form of the message and building an idolatry around that messenger. That's not what the game is. The real thing is about getting into the practice and relearning it for ourselves, right? That's what free will is. That's what real freedom is. That's what all the teachers were really teaching us. So to paraphrase Carl Jung for myself, those who seek out there sleep. Those who journey within strive to awaken. And that's what we need to, that's where we start. If I may be so bold, it is my humble opinion that if you have meditated your entire life, huzzah, awesome, the first thing you need to do is am I so woke? I need to wake up from my wokefulness test. Because as the woke pug reminds us, being woke is yet just another illusion. To go, aha, I realize everything is an illusion. And I must wake up from that. Being awakened. If you're sitting in your meat bag of flesh and bone and spit and poop, and you're using the internet to judge others and get self-aggrandized. Now, mind you, I get accused of this all the time, and I'd like to point out that I'm not. I'm the one going, hey guys, we're nowhere near close. We gotta drop everything. Everything. Because whatever we're doing, if you're fighting to defend or defeat Donald Trump, I mean, that's fun and all, and okay, we can't just completely ignore all the problems in the world. But if we really want to get on top of the solution, the real place is to turn inward, right? And to acknowledge that out there, all that stuff, that's great and all, and it's useful. And yes, there's stuff to be worried about. And yes, it's really hard to meditate if someone's coming at you with an axe and their intent is to, relieve your head from its body. But most of us don't find ourselves in that situation, right? Even if things are a little tough. Mind you, if things are harder than that, and you're listening to my podcast, whoa, get yourself out of that horrible situation before you listen to any more of my podcasts, please. And then, when you're like, okay, I can handle doing a little bit of meditation. Because, as I was saying in a recent episode, that isn't as hard as it seems. Even if your situations are tough, right? Situations get pretty bad, you can still stop and focus on your breath and go, meditation, Zen is realizing that divinity is doing the breathing. Divinity made the air to be breathed. Divinity is the lungs, the very cellular tissue that is the boundary between the air and me using the air. And that divinity is all the things involved in that act of breathing. And that I am so much not breathing as divinity is. Right? That divinity is being the air and the lungs and the every other part of my body and the knowingness of how to do it. How do you know how to breathe? No one can answer that question. You just know. How do you know how to chew food? You learn as you go because some food's a little weird and complicated and you gotta deal with it in certain ways. You sort of have this completely unexplained, no one's, I don't think, although I would delight in the discovery of some massive, quietly private, amateur citizen scientist attempt at describing the very many different modalities of eating food and just consuming things. And that there's a sort of unwritten language of understanding there, right? Like, how does the body grow its hair? I don't know, but it does. And there's a lot of things that go on in the world without words. And that if we really want to address the situation out there in front of us, we have to stop neglecting the situation deep down inside. Because the two are as intertwined as up and down and left and right. They truly are. No matter how hard that may seem to appreciate at times, it's a truth that is part of the profound messages that have come from any legitimate messenger that is attempting to facilitate the species-wide evolution towards transcending this kindergarten version of ourselves. It isn't as simple as this. It's infinitely more complicated. But in order to sort of cope with it and think about it, one could arguably use the following model. We, as a species, collectively, all of us, and this isn't a judgment and it's not a contest, so stop with the judging and competing. We're all in kindercare. We're like in introduction to school, grade 0, and we have yet to stop beating the shit out of each other over who gets to play with which toy. And all of the teachers and all of the guides are patiently waiting for us to set the toys down and learn for ourselves that we don't need to beat the living bejesus out of each other over which toy and how to use it, etc., etc., etc. And that there's a lot to learn before we get into the classroom, right? Like, this room, this is like the lobby, for shit's sake. And we have a few things to learn here in the lobby that we're radically ignoring. And one of the most urgent of those things, they're all important, and they're all mind-blowingly inside and kind of wordless, but also we can have rational discussions about them. One of the most urgent is attending to the generations upon generations upon generations worth of spiritual trauma that most of y'all as people here on this planet and on others in every timeline and every time frame and every probability waveform function have been radically ignoring, because we, as society, oppressing ourselves because we blame society, but we are society because we are inseparable from society. And so are the people in the quote-unquote positions of power, overt or hidden. And we are, no matter how much we fight the idea, no matter how much we want to reject the idea, we are ultimately as much of a collective species as far as the way our mind and our other energy frequencies or dimensions or bodies work as we are individuals. And that we are the expression of those two things. And that, that's one of the things we need to achieve, a fundamental baseline level of mastery, of proficiency in utilizing in a non-destructive, non-toxic, blow up the world, non-self-undermining, non-torturing others, about greed and power and just keeping others beneath us kind of way, before we're even allowed to learn the other things we're going to learn here in Kinder Care Classroom Zero, in order to be allowed to enter the next classroom. And guess what? The next classroom is effectively here and now. That's the mindfucky part of it. We are the ones to blame. All of us collectively and individually if we're going to blame somebody, we have to blame all of ourselves. For we as a collective are all equally apportioned a responsibility towards achieving that whole complicated process, so we can get on to the various levels of deeper understanding of our multiple modalities of being. Because we are more than just these ambulatory talking meat sacks of flesh and goo and bone. Goo is for all the gross bits that are less solid than the meaty bits, right? So there we are. I've rambled way too long today, folks. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the madness. I hope that if you've been listening to the show for a bit, none of this was so redundant that it was annoying, but that it all kind of came at you in a fresh way to help you get to a deeper place with it. We are not just these bodies, but we also don't want to abuse and reject these bodies. We need to come to a sort of Christ level of understanding, a Christ-like, practical, common, ordinary, rudimentary understanding of how to be both embodied in flesh and manifested as sort of cogent, tangible energy consciousness. Then we can get on with the deeper, more profound, more fascinating things that we could be learning, right? And doing together as a divine species, instead of indulging in all this mucking about in the mire, treating ourselves as a banal meat sock. I understand how I could, at first glance, be really offensive to a lot of people coming from a lot of different directions. But my goal in sharing my wild and spiraling thoughts is to facilitate everyone, into a deeper understanding of, how to negotiate your own journey inwards. Even if it doesn't seem like I'm doing that. And because I've rambled on for way too long for one session, I'll leave you there with that.
And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily ZenCast with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.
I should have a quote for this part of the show, and I really don't. But enjoy your journey deep within.